She never expected a glass of soda to become a national headline. She didn't scream. She didn't throw punches. But when that Coca-Cola hit her silk blouse on a plane, she helped fund the world changed. Who was this calm, elegant black woman, quietly humiliated in first class? And why did the airline crew smirk instead of speak up? But the bigger question, who was her husband? The man in seat 3A had remained silent, just watching until he made a single call. And 5 hours later, the entire aviation board was shaking. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about quiet strength, institutional rot, and what happens when dignity collides with unchecked power at 37,000 feet in the sky. Before we begin this deeply moving tale of truth, leadership, and transformation, tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed injustice in silence and regretted it later? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers and storytellers, because this story will stay with you long after the seatbelt sign turns off. The seat was upholstered in dove gray leather, cradling its occupant with silent luxury. Overhead, the gentle glow of amber cabin lights bathed the first-class cabin in a warmth that felt more like a boutique hotel than an aircraft 38,000 feet in the sky. Subtle notes of lavender and bergamot lingered in the filtered air, courtesy of a discreet aromatherapy diffuser built into the ventilation system. Celeste Monroe sat in seat 2A, near the window. The city lights below were fading into a blanket of cloud, and in her lap rested a thin folder of printed notes for backup. Her laptop was charging in the side port. The keynote she was to deliver at the Geneva Symposium on Contemporary Art was saved in 5 locations, but she still didn't feel at ease. Not because of the tech, not because of the speech, but because of her, the flight attendant, the one with the practiced smile and icy undertone. Karen Walker, tall, with a lean, upright posture that communicated authority. Her platinum blonde bob didn't move when she did, and neither did her expression. From the moment Celeste had stepped on board, Karen had made it clear wordlessly, effortlessly, that she didn't belong. Not in that seat, not in that space. Celeste was used to it, or so she told herself. She'd taught for 13 years at Columbia, navigated boardrooms, museum acquisitions, donor galas. She had walked through worlds not designed for her with her back straight and her voice even. But this plane, this cabin, this flight had held a certain kind of performance, an assumption of who deserved attention and who did not. Celeste's blouse was pale ivory, the kind that made even her subtle makeup feel like too much. She wore no jewelry beyond a simple silver band on her right hand. Her braids were neatly pulled into a low bun, pinned just above her nape. Her heels were low, her speech ready, her smile kept for those who earned it. As she reviewed her talking points, the twinge of tension in her back reminded her that rest would be wiser than revision. But rest was hard when the weight of being watched, not admired, but evaluated, coiled in her muscles. Earlier, when she'd boarded, she had extended a quiet greeting to Karen, a gentle, "Good evening." The response had been tight-lipped, not rude, but pointedly neutral. She'd noticed the contrast. The older white man who'd boarded ahead of her, balding but cheerful, had received a warm welcome aboard. "Sir." The young brunette in Louboutin heels behind her had earned a compliment on her handbag. "Celeste." A nod, barely. And when she asked if her coat could be hung, politely as always, Karen had taken it with 2 fingers, like it might stain her hands. No, Celeste hadn't imagined it. She had simply chosen, as she often did, to hold her dignity closer than her outrage. A soft chime overhead signaled the completion of boarding. The captain's voice filtered through the intercom, calm and informative, The weather in Geneva would be clear. Flight time just under 7 hours. A gentle tailwind would bring them in 10 minutes early. Celeste exhaled. She hoped those 10 minutes would matter. Across the aisle, someone sneezed. A flight attendant, the younger one. Alina offered a tissue with a smile and a soft, "Bless you." Her demeanor was different, kind, unhardened. She couldn't have been more than 28, her dark hair in a braid over one shoulder. Her uniform slightly less crisp than Karen's, but her eyes were open. Celeste turned back to her notes, but her thoughts wandered. To Julian, her husband. He wasn't on the manifest, not publicly. She knew where he was, though. Likely still in the private suite near the nose of the plane, hidden behind the panel marked crew access. A design trick for discretion. Very few passengers ever knew there was a 3-room residence up front. Julian Monroe was not the kind of man who announced himself, which is why Karen had no idea the woman she'd been minimizing for the last 30 minutes was married to the owner of the airline she worked for. Celeste didn't find comfort in that thought. She found tension. What if Julian came out too soon? What if it created a scene? She didn't want this to be about power. She wanted it to be about dignity, about basic respect. The door to the galley clicked open. Karen reappeared with a tray of pre-departure drinks. She smiled brightly at the woman in seat 2C, an elegant blonde reading The Economist, and asked if she'd prefer rosé or the new Californian Chardonnay. When she reached Celeste's row, the smile evaporated. "Water," she asked, as if making a guess. Celeste nodded. "Still, please." Karen handed her a glass without making eye contact. "Thank you," Celeste offered quietly. Karen had already turned away. Celeste took a sip. Cold, clean. She didn't need the wine. She needed space to breathe. From behind her seat, she heard a male voice, measured and pleasant. "Excuse me, miss, it was the man from seat 3B. I'd love the Chardonnay, if there's still some left." Karen laughed. "Of course. For you always." Celeste closed her eyes. Not in bitterness, in practice. It was a ritual. To pause, to count her breath, to choose, every time, not to harden, because it was so easy. Too easy to carry anger, like armor. But armor was heavy, and she had too much brilliance to carry to be weighed down by someone else's prejudice. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded photograph, a snapshot of a small art studio in Atlanta. Her father had built it with his own hands when she was 12. He used to say, "Silly girl, don't let anyone talk over your brushstroke. They don't get to decide your colors." She smiled at that. Karen Walker could strip warmth from a welcome, but she could not rewrite Celeste Monroe's worth. And as the aircraft began its slow, graceful roll onto the runway, Celeste fastened her seatbelt, sat up straight, and let the hum of the engines drown out the chill behind her. This flight had just begun. But so had something else. Something no one, not even Karen, was ready for. Celeste hadn't said a word in over 20 minutes. She didn't need to. The silence around her said enough. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. First class on an international night flight had its own rules of engagement. Soft voices, minimal movements, just the gentle shuffle of slippers and the rustle of linen napkins. But inside Celeste's chest, there was motion, a slow coiling, a tension that had nothing to do with altitude. Across the aisle, a woman was laughing, a quick, tinkling sound. Karen Walker was crouched beside her, holding a wine list and gesturing animatedly, like they were old friends sharing a private joke. The woman's seat 3D had long red nails and a diamond watch. She was on her third glass of Sauvignon Blanc. Karen had already offered to chill her moisturizer in the galley. The contrast was surgical. Celeste had asked for an extra napkin earlier. Just one. Karen hadn't even replied, just nodded once, walked away, and never came back. That napkin never arrived. Celeste didn't need it. Not physically, but emotionally. It had started to matter more than it should have. It became a measure, not of the airline, not even of Karen, but of herself. She hated that. She glanced down at her notes again, but the lines swam. Something about cultural iconography in post-apartheid installations. She couldn't concentrate. Not now. Across the aisle. The redhead laughed again. Karen touched her shoulder lightly before rising and continuing her rounds. Celeste adjusted her posture, straightened her legs, smoothed the crease of her trousers. She'd grown up being told, "Don't give them a reason. Sit taller. Speak clearer. Be unshakable, because if they find one crack, they'll widen it into a chasm." Even now, all these years later, those lessons were tattooed on her bones. And yet, there was a crack. Not visible, not loud, but there. She looked up as Karen approached again, this time with a tray of hot towels, a ritual warmth offered in cloth, a moment of care. Celeste held out her hands. Karen passed the towel to the man behind her, then the one across, then circled back, stopping abruptly at Celeste's seat. "Oh," she said, as if surprised she was there. "Would you like one?" There was no eye contact, just the sharp press of politeness. Celeste nodded. "Yes, please." Karen handed it to her without softness. Just fabric and fingers. Nothing more. It was small, but it was cumulative. Each act a whisper, each gesture a subtraction, each smile offered elsewhere a reminder of what was withheld from her. Celeste closed her eyes as she pressed the warm cloth to her palms. She didn't want to be here anymore. Not on this flight, not in this space, not in this feeling. But she was. And so, she breathed through it. "Excuse me," a voice said nearby. Male. Polite. Purposeful. She turned slightly to see a man standing in the aisle 2 rows behind her. Early 40s, clean cut, wearing a navy blazer with no tie. He had the quiet precision of someone used to courtrooms. She would later learn his name was Grant Lewis, an attorney from Boston, traveling to Zurich for arbitration. "I think you missed my drink order," he said gently. Karen blinked, startled, then smiled quickly. "Of course, sir. I'll bring it right away." She turned, caught off guard for a second, then resumed her usual smooth composure. Celeste noted that Grant hadn't raised his voice, hadn't complained, just observed, asserted, and she envied that ability. When Karen returned to the galley, Celeste leaned slightly back in her seat, resting her head for a moment. That's when a voice from the window startled her. "You okay?" It was Alana, the junior attendant. She had paused at Celeste's row, a tray of chocolates in her hand. Her expression was hesitant, but kind. Celeste opened her eyes fully. "Yes, just tired." Alina offered her a small smile. "Long day." Celeste nodded. "Long few years, actually." They shared a quick look. It was brief, but it mattered. Alina didn't pry. She simply set a wrapped chocolate on Celeste's tray. "This one's my favorite. Dark with sea salt. It makes things better. A little." Celeste managed a faint smile. "Thank you." The moment passed as quickly as it had come, but Celeste found herself clutching the chocolate longer than she expected. It was ridiculous. She wasn't a child needing treats, but kindness, when you've been deprived of it, lands differently. A few rows back. Grant Lewis watched as Karen once again leaned into a conversation with another first-class guest. All smiles and indulgence. Then he looked back at Celeste, who sat alone, composed but clearly not at ease. He didn't know her story, but he knew imbalance when he saw it. He was trained to see patterns, and this one was glaring. When dinner service began, the gap widened. Karen took orders with glowing enthusiasm from others recommending wines, describing entrees like a fine art auctioneer. When she reached Celeste, her voice lost all color. And no greeting, no smile, just a pen poised in impatience. Celeste considered correcting the tone, but didn't. Instead, she kept her voice calm. "I'll have the grilled salmon. Please, no wine." Karen jotted it down. Allergic. No. Karen didn't respond, just turned and moved on. And Celeste. She sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady, but her heart ticking faster. What was it about women like Karen? Why did they move through the world with this quiet entitlement? This assumption that someone like Celeste, brilliant, educated, composed, was still somehow less worthy of kindness. It was exhausting. More than that, it was erasing, not overt, not loud, but relentless, a chipping away. And tonight, on this flight, it had followed her 30,000 feet above the earth. She didn't need grand displays. She didn't want special treatment. She just wanted equal humanity. Was that too much to ask? Apparently. For some, it was. When her meal came, it was placed down without a word. The utensils clinked too hard. The tray slid too fast. Her glass of water was nearly teetering. Karen was careful with others, but with her only barely professional. Celeste unfolded her napkin, ate quietly. The food was warm, well seasoned, but the bitterness in her mouth came from something else, from knowing this wasn't the first time, and fearing it wouldn't be the last. Across the aisle, Grant caught her eye. It wasn't a stare. It was a message. "I see it too." For the first time that flight, Celeste felt less alone. The salmon was excellent, perfectly seared, resting on a bed of herb couscous and asparagus spears so tender they could have passed for velvet. The kind of dish that belonged in a brasserie, not at 35,000 feet. Celeste took small bites, pausing between each, less from etiquette and more from exhaustion. She wasn't hungry anymore. She was maintaining appearances. Karen had returned to refill wine glasses 3 times for the couple seated 2 rows ahead, and each time. She skipped Celeste as if her row was invisible. The water glass sat half empty, untouched. Alina passed by quietly once, gave a subtle glance, then moved on with the bread basket. Celeste had told herself she wouldn't count the slights, but they were hard not to tally when they piled like pebbles in a shoe, each one small, together unbearable. She was almost done with her meal when it happened. Karen came by briskly, ready to clear plates. She reached across Celeste's tray without asking, her elbow too fast, too sharp, too careless, and in one seamless movement, her arm knocked Celeste's fork from the tray. It landed against Celeste's silk blouse with a thwap. A smear of butter sauce spread across the fabric like a wound. There was a momenta frozen, electric second when neither of them moved. Then Karen gasped softly. Not shock, not remorse, just performance. "Oh, I'm clumsy tonight." She reached in her apron, pulled out a cocktail napkin, and dabbed at the stain with 2 fingers. The motion was quick, mechanical, and entirely ineffective. If anything, she made it worse. "It'll come out," she added casually, still not making eye contact. Celeste inhaled through her nose. Slowly, controlled. "I'd like a proper cloth and some club soda, please." Her tone was neutral, polite, but the undertone was unmistakable. Karen's eyes flickered, finally looking at her. Something passed between them in that glance. Not apology, not recognition, but challenge. She turned without a word and walked briskly back toward the galley. Celeste looked down at the blouse. It was pale blue, chosen specifically for this flight. Crisp, elegant, effortless. The stain was centered just below her collarbone, thick and glistening. This wasn't about fabric. It was about intention. Grant leaned forward slightly from his row. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice low, meant only for her. Celeste nodded once. Just clumsy service, apparently. Grant studied her face. She didn't flinch, but he saw the restraint there. Karen returned less than a minute later, setting down a folded bar towel and a small glass of soda water with a quiet clink. She didn't offer to help this time, didn't ask if it was enough. She just left it and turned away again. Celeste lifted the towel, dipped it into the soda, and gently pressed it to her blouse. The butter stain spread slightly, faint and still oily beneath the cotton. She dabbed again, slower this time, more methodically. Her mother had taught her to treat stains immediately. Don't wait for them to dry, baby. They only get harder to remove once ignored. Her mother wasn't wrong, but some stains weren't physical. Celeste sat still for a moment afterward, letting the towel rest on her tray. She didn't feel anger yet. That would come later. What she felt now was something quieter, sharper, disappointment, not just in Karen, in herself for not saying something stronger, for still trying to hold poise in the face of blatant disregard. She wasn't naive. She knew there were Karens everywhere in institutions, in museums, in the halls of academia. But the casualness of this one, her ease in making Celeste feel smaller, cut deeper than most. And the worst part, there was no one to report it to, no camera to replay it, no manager on this plane who hadn't already flown with Karen for years and let this exact thing slide again and again. You can't prove tone. You can't quantify disdain. But you can feel it. And now Celeste's blouse wore it like a badge. Julian still hadn't come out of the private suite. She hadn't texted him, hadn't told him anything yet. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she knew what would happen if he stepped out. The weight he carried in the air would shift the cabin. She didn't want that, least. Not yet. She wanted to handle this, herself, on her terms. A moment later, Alina returned down the aisle, checking trays. When she saw the towel, her face changed. "Oh no," she said gently, stepping closer. "What happened, Fork?" Celeste replied, simple and flat. "Dropped during clearing." Alina's brows knit. She didn't. She stopped herself. Did she at least bring soda water? Celeste nodded toward the half-used glass. Alina paused, her lips pressed together like she was holding back more than words. "If you'd like. I can get a stain stick from my personal kit," she offered softly. "It's not airline issued, but it works." Celeste looked at her, saw the sincerity, and nodded. "Thank you." Alina left briefly and returned with a small travel stick. She handed it over with the kind of quiet care that makes an apology for someone else's cruelty feel real. "Here," she said. "Leave it on for a few minutes. Then blot." Gently, Celeste took it. "Thank you, Alina." The use of her name made the younger woman blink, then smile faintly. "You're welcome, ma'am." As she left, Celeste looked out the window into the black night. Nothing out there but stars, and clouds, and the knowledge that miles above the world, some battles looked like napkins and fork stains, but they were something else entirely. Beneath the hum of the aircraft, her mind flickered to the art installation she'd be speaking on in Geneva. The Quiet Resistance, it was called, a study in everyday defiance brushstrokes made in brown tones, soft figures holding their ground without raising a hand. She'd studied it, lectured on it, celebrated it. Now, she lived it. And as Karen passed by again without even a glance, Celeste pressed the stain stick softly into her blouse and whispered to herself, "You are not the one who made a mess." The cabin had dimmed. Overhead, the ceiling lighting glowed like moonlight filtered through water. A few passengers had reclined into lie-flat comfort, adjusting silk eye masks and noise-canceling headphones. The quiet hush of high-altitude night had settled. Celeste sat upright. She had tried reclining once earlier, but her blouse is still faintly stained. Despite the stain, stick clung damp against her skin. There was a chill in it, and a weight, more than discomfort. It felt like residue. Her throat was dry. She reached for the glass of water Karen had set down earlier, only to realize it was nearly empty. Only a few melting ice cubes remained. The recycled cabin air pressed dry heat across her face and lips. A simple need. Water. Something cool. Something ordinary. She pressed the call button overhead. A blue light blinked on and stayed on. She waited. 2 minutes passed. No footsteps. No motion. No response. Karen hadn't come. Celeste glanced toward the galley. From her seat, she could see the faint silhouettes of 2 attendants near the service station. One was clearly Alina, her dark braid swinging as she organized silverware into a drawer. The other Karen stood near the beverage cart, arms folded, talking with tight, animated gestures. Celeste waited. Another 3 minutes passed. Still no movement toward her row. She pressed the call button again. The light blinked. Bright. Now urgent. This time, Karen turned. Celeste saw her glance at the light, then at Alina. She said something under her breath. Alina began to step forward, but Karen blocked her with a single sharp motion. An invisible wall. And then Karen came. Quick steps, face tight, posture clipped. She stopped beside Celeste's seat and leaned in just enough to make the air feel hostile. "Yes," she said. "Not how can I help you. Not is something wrong. Just one word, flat and sharp as a blade." Celeste met her eyes. Calm, controlled. "I'd like a glass of Coca-Cola. Please, with ice." Karen blinked. There it was. The request that, in any other context, would have been simple, mundane. But here, now, in this charged space between them, it was defiance. The passenger she had tried to ignore had dared to ask for attention. Karen's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, voice sticky sweet. "Coca-Cola, with ice." She turned and walked back down the aisle, each step rigid, each motion rehearsed. Celeste sat still. She didn't want a confrontation. She wanted a drink. But part of her knew that wasn't all this was about anymore. It was about the lines people drew in silence, about how power moved in smiles, in service, in who got offered a napkin without asking and who had to press a button twice to be noticed. She folded her hands in her lap. 2 rows back, Grant Lewis watched everything. He didn't move, didn't interfere, but he didn't look away either. In the galley. Karen snatched a glass from the rack. She opened the can of soda too quickly. The hiss loud in the stillness. Ice clinked into the glass like distant thunder. Alina spoke too softly to be heard, but her posture was concerned. Karen barked back a few words. Alina stepped back. Karen walked down the aisle again, chin high, shoulders squared. She didn't pause at any other seat. When she arrived at Celeste's row, her smile returned. "Here is your Coca-Cola," she said. And then it happened. She didn't simply hand it over. She tripped. A sudden jolt of her body. A sharp jerk forward. One foot slid. Her hand pitched upward. The can tilted. The glass tumbled. And an entire wave of ice-cold soda cascaded down onto Celeste's chest. It hit her like a slap. The chill shocked her. The carbonation crackled against her skin. The dark syrup soaked into the silk of her blouse, spreading into the old butter stain like ink across paper. It dripped onto her lap, her hands, her laptop. She gasped, not from pain, from disbelief. The liquid fizzed, pooled, then silence. The screen of her laptop flickered once, twice, then went black. Karen stumbled back, hand to her chest. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed. Two tripped. "I didn't see that wrinkle in the carpet. You okay?" Celeste sat frozen. The cold of the soda felt like fire. Not from temperature, but from humiliation. And Karen stood there, wide-eyed, panting slightly. Too much theater, too much intention. Celeste looked up. Not angry, not loud, but with a kind of quiet that made the air itself tighten. "You did that on purpose," she said. Karen blinked. "Excuse me. You did that on purpose." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed like thunder. Karen's fake concern twisted into defensiveness. "How dare you accuse me of that?" she snapped. "I tripped. It was an accident. I could lose my job over a spill like this. And you're standing there accusing me." Her voice was climbing, loud enough that passengers stirred. Karen pointed at the dark, dead laptop. "You'll need to fill out a damaged property form. There's a process. You can't just make baseless claims." She reached into her apron and offered Celeste 3 cocktail napkins. "For the mess," she said flatly. Celeste stared at the napkins. 3 thin squares of paper, already half wet. The absurdity of it. The disrespect of it. Her hands were shaking, not with rage, with resolve. She rose from her seat. Not fast, not dramatic, but slow, deliberate. "I want to speak to the captain," she said. Karen crossed her arms. "He's flying a plane. Ma'am, he doesn't deal with drink spills." "You are not handling this," another voice said. It came from behind. Grant Lewis. He was standing now, his expression grim, voice calm. "I've watched you for 2 hours," he said, addressing Karen. "Your behavior toward Ms. Monroe has been noticeably different from how you've treated every other passenger in this cabin. And that trip, it wasn't credible. I saw your feet. There was no wrinkle. There was no stumble." Karen opened her mouth to object, but the tone in his voice stopped her. "This is no longer a customer service issue," Grant added. "It's a matter of misconduct, possibly worse." Alina emerged from the galley, her face pale. "I'll get the purser," she said quietly. Karen turned to her, furious. "No, I will handle this." But another voice entered the moment, one that didn't come from the aisle. It came from the front, from behind the panel marked Crew Access, from the private suite. The voice was male, calm, rich with authority. "That won't be necessary," it said. Everyone turned, the door opened, and Julian Monroe stepped out. He wasn't wearing a name tag. He didn't need one. In that instant, the air in the cabin shifted. He walked with the kind of presence that made people move instinctively, not out of fear, but out of recognition. He scanned the scene. His eyes landed on Celeste, and the look on his face changed from composed to concerned. "Celeste," he said, moving toward her. "What happened?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped slightly toward him, her blouse soaked, her laptop dead, her voice steady but soft. "She poured it on me." Karen turned, confused. "Wait, who are you?" Julian didn't answer her. He looked at Celeste's ruined clothes, her soaked notebook, the fizz still clinging to her sleeve. Then he turned to Karen, and the look in his eyes was not anger. It was command. "What's your name?" he asked. Karen straightened. "Karen Walker." Julian nodded once. "Karen Walker." He repeated, "I need you to fetch the flight purser and the captain, and do it now." Karen hesitated. "With all due respect, this is not your—" Julian reached into his jacket, pulled out a small, understated business card, handed it to her. Karen read it. Her breath caught. "Julian Monroe, founder and CEO, Halcyon Air Group, owner of the airline." Karen staggered back, card trembling in her hand. Celeste didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The ignition had already begun. For a moment, the entire cabin of Flight 316 stood still. Karen Walker, senior flight attendant for over 19 years, held the business card like it had scorched her hand. The name printed on it wasn't loud. There were no embossed logos or gilded fonts, just black ink on cream stock. Clean. Certain. Julian Monroe, founder and CEO, Halcyon Air Group. Celeste said nothing. Her blouse clung to her like shame that wasn't hers. Her laptop screen was still dark, sticky soda pooling beneath the edge of the casing. And yet, she stood calm, not triumphant, not smug, just present. Karen took one step back. I didn't know," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I didn't know who she was." Julian turned toward her. His voice didn't rise. He didn't have to raise it. That's exactly the problem. His words landed like a gavel. Karen looked around, as if expecting someone, anyone, to speak in her defense. The silence was heavy. Even the hum of the plane seemed quiet under his authority. "Fetch the captain," Julian repeated. "And the purser." Karen hesitated. "Mr. Monroe." "I'm sure we can handle this without Karen," he said, voice steady. "You've already mishandled it." She blinked, then turned and walked quickly down the aisle, the card still trembling in her hand. Alina hovered nearby, uncertain. She glanced at Celeste, then at Julian, waiting for a cue. "Alina," Julian said gently, "could you bring my wife a fresh towel? And whatever she needs to clean up." Alina nodded instantly and disappeared into the galley. Celeste finally let out a breath. Her hands, once so still, now trembled faintly at her sides. Julian noticed. "Come here," he said quietly. She stepped toward him. He lifted a hand and gently touched her soaked sleeve. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a soft handkerchief, white linen, crisply folded, and handed it to her without a word. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. "I didn't want you to have to come out," she said softly. "I didn't want to come out." He replied, "But you pressed the button twice." There was a flicker of humor between them, barely there. Then the moment passed. The purser arrived first. Marisa Kotza, tall woman in her early 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a French twist. She had the practiced professionalism of someone who had seen turbulence of every kind. Her eyes landed on Celeste first, widened slightly at the sight of her soaked blouse, and then settled on Julian. "I was told there's a situation," she said, voice calm but cautious. Julian gave a single nod. "Where's Captain Douglas? He's being notified now. He was mid-checkpoint, but should be here shortly." Julian turned to Grant, who stood quietly nearby, still watching. "Sir," he said, "you witnessed the incident." Grant stepped forward. "I did. I saw her approach with the drink, and I saw the way she executed the spill. It wasn't clumsy. It was calculated. I also watched her behavior toward your wife from the moment we boarded. It was discriminatory. No other word fits." Marisa inhaled slowly. Her face remained neutral, but her shoulders tensed. Julian looked at her. "Marisa, how long have you worked for Halcyon?" 17 years, sir. "And how long have you worked with Karen Walker?" "Almost as long." "Then you know her." A pause. "I do." "Have you ever received complaints about her behavior toward passengers of color?" Marisa didn't answer right away. That hesitation spoke louder than any yes. Julian nodded slightly, as if confirming something he already suspected. The captain arrived moments later. Captain Douglas was tall and broad, the kind of man whose presence made passengers feel safe even in a storm. But tonight, he looked anything but comfortable. "Mr. Monroe," he said, extending a hand. Julian didn't take it. Instead, he said, "Captain, thank you for coming. Please be advised that this is no longer a routine customer service issue. Your lead flight attendant deliberately assaulted a passenger, my wife, with a full beverage, after a long pattern of discriminatory behavior." Douglas's face went pale. "I wasn't aware of the full context. I was told it was an accident." "It wasn't," Grant said. Celeste finally spoke. "She poured it on me. After hours of microaggressions, after treating every other passenger like royalty and me like an inconvenience." Julian turned back to Marisa. "She's done this before, hasn't she?" Marisa took a breath. "There have been patterns. Nothing formal. Complaints that didn't make it through HR. Karen had protection there." "Not anymore," Julian said. "Effective immediately. She is relieved of her duties. I want her removed from this flight upon landing. Her credentials are revoked. Her access terminated. If union policy requires documentation, I will sign it myself." Captain Douglas shifted uneasily. "With respect, Miss Monroe, we typically don't terminate crew mid-flight. We do now." His voice was steel. "And Marisa," he added, "you'll oversee her removal. I trust you to do it quietly and professionally." "Yes, sir." Alina returned with a robe, a clean towel, and a small travel kit. "I've prepped the lavatory in the suite," she whispered to Celeste. "It's private." Celeste nodded, took the robe. As she turned to leave, Julian caught her wrist gently. "Are you all right?" he asked again. She paused. Then, softly, "No." He didn't try to fix it. Not with words. He just walked her toward the suite, opened the door, and led her inside. Only when the door closed behind her did he turn back to the others. "Marisa," he said, "I need a copy of every passenger complaint ever filed against Karen Walker. Internal reports, informal remarks, anything that might have been buried." "Yes, sir. And I want to speak to Alina again before we land. Alone." Marisa nodded and left to complete the tasks. Grant stepped forward once more. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've flown dozens of airlines. What I saw tonight was one of the most disgraceful acts of service I've ever witnessed. But the way you responded, that was extraordinary." Julian offered a brief nod. "It's not extraordinary," he said. "It's overdue." Celeste stood under the hot water in the suite's private shower. She scrubbed her arms, her chest, her collarbone, anywhere the sticky soda had touched. But even when the physical residue was gone, the feeling lingered. She leaned against the marble wall and let herself cry. Just for a minute. Then she turned off the water, dried herself off, put on the robe, and stood tall. The door to the suite clicked shut behind Celeste, leaving Julian alone in the cabin corridor. He stood still for a moment, listening. The quiet beyond the door comforted him. He knew she needed space needed to strip off the humiliation with each drop of water, but it took everything in him not to barge in and hold her. Julian Monroe wasn't known for patience. In business, he moved like a scalpel clean, precise, and fast. But with Celeste, it was different. He moved on her time. Behind him, the cabin buzzed faintly as passengers whispered among themselves. The overhead lights remained dimmed, but the mood had shifted. People were aware something serious had happened. In first class, drama wasn't uncommon, but this wasn't champagne spilled on suede. This was something deeper, something that made even the privileged passengers feel uncomfortable. Injustice has a way of silencing a room, even when it doesn't touch them directly. Marisa returned with a tablet in hand. Her expression was composed, but tension lined her mouth. "I've pulled what I could," she said softly. 8 flagged incidents, all unofficial, all verbal complaints. Julian took the tablet and scanned the entries. The language was disturbingly familiar. Passenger felt dismissed. Crew member did not respond to multiple requests. Felt invisible. None of it had ever made it past HR. No write-ups, no formal consequences. Who handled these, Julian asked. Mostly Gerald Finch. Marisa said. He was head of in-flight HR until last year. Julian's jaw tightened. He remembered Gerald. Smug. Polished. The kind of manager who claimed a smooth friction, but really just buried complaints to keep metrics clean. Karen had clearly been protected, enabled, and that stopped tonight. "Where is she now?" Julian asked. Marisa exhaled. "In the crew galley. I placed her under directive not to interact with passengers. She's shaken." Julian didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Good." A pause. "Then send in Alina." Marisa nodded and turned back toward the galley. Julian stood near the suite door as Alina approached, hands clasped in front of her. Face open but anxious. She was young, probably early 30s, not new, but still carrying that hopeful alertness that hadn't been beaten out by routine. "Mr. Monroe," she said gently. "Come in for a moment," he said, holding the door open to the front lounge of the suite. The room was hushed and immaculate. Walnut trim, soft lighting, a bar lined with crystal tumblers. Julian gestured for her to sit. She did, cautiously. "I won't keep you long," he began. "I just want you to speak honestly. No consequences. Just truth." Alina hesitated, then nodded. "How long have you worked with Karen?" 2.5 years, she said. "We've been paired on rotations a lot." Julian watched her closely. "And what have you seen?" Alina looked down at her hands. "I've seen her treat some passengers differently," she said slowly, "especially women of color, or younger women who fly alone. She's dismissive. She'll take longer to respond to their requests. Skip over them during service. Sometimes just flat out ignore them. But when they complain, she always has a reason ready. Says she was busy, or they didn't press the button, or that she thought someone else was helping." Julian nodded. "Have you ever reported it?" "No," she admitted. "No one ever does. And to be honest, we're discouraged from reporting senior attendants. especially ones with good performance stats. Julian leaned back slightly. "Did you see the spill?" "Yes," she said instantly, voice sharper. "I didn't see her trip. I saw her look at Celeste, her face, the tightness in it, and then she tilted forward too much. There was no wrinkle in the carpet. I checked, and afterward she acted shocked. But it wasn't real. I could tell. And the way she snapped at me told me to stay out of it. That wasn't protocol. That was fear." Julian considered her carefully. "You've been honest," he said. "That matters." Alina sat straighter. "I didn't want this job just to serve wine. I wanted to be part of a company that did better. That's why I joined Halcyon." He nodded. "You still are." He stood. "So when we land, I want you to stay on, with full pay. We're going to be conducting a full cultural audit, and you, if you're willing, are going to help us rebuild this airline from the inside." Alina blinked. "Me, you're a witness, and you have integrity. That's exactly who should help set the new standard." She swallowed. "Yes, I'd be honored." Julian extended his hand. She took it. Then the door to the suite's bathroom opened quietly. Celeste stepped out. She was dressed now in the soft white robe Alina had brought. Her braids were damp, her face calm again. But Julian could see it beneath the surface, a tide still rolling. Alina stood quickly. Celeste gave her a quiet nod, a thank you that didn't need words. Alina left, gently closing the door behind her. Julian walked over. "You didn't have to fix this," she said softly. "Not like this." "I didn't fix anything," he said. "I just ended a chapter that should never have been written in the first place." Celeste looked toward the wet blouse folded on the counter, the stained laptop beside it. She shook her head slightly. "I feel embarrassed," she said, "and angry that I feel embarrassed." "Isn't that strange?" "Not strange," Julian said. "It's how people make you feel when they do something awful with a smile." She stepped closer. I held it together for as long as I could. "I know. I didn't want it to become a scene." "It didn't." She raised an eyebrow. "Okay," he admitted. "It became a scene." A beat passed. Then she exhaled. "I feel like I'm holding my own skin in place." Julian gently touched her hand. "You don't have to. Not with me." Celeste leaned into him. For just a moment. Not long, but long enough. When they emerged from the suite 20 minutes later, the cabin felt quiet again. Passengers glanced up. Most turned away politely. A few held the look longer and uncomfortable curiosity. Others nodded subtly, offering unspoken solidarity. Marisa waited near the galley. "It's done," she said quietly. "She knows?" Julian asked. "Yes. I informed her she's being relieved of duty upon landing." She didn't argue. "She will," Celeste said softly. Marisa nodded grimly. "Maybe, but not on this plane." As the flight continued toward Zurich, the quiet became more comfortable. The first-class service was resumed, this time with a different energy. Alina moved through the cabin gently, evenly, with a quiet grace that settled even the most nervous guests. Celeste sat back down in her seat, the new robe wrapped snug around her. She looked out the window and saw only sky, endless, open sky. But something inside her felt heavier. Not defeat, but aftermath. And somewhere within that heaviness, a quiet fire began to burn. She would not let this become just a memory. This was a beginning. Somewhere near the back of the first-class cabin, a man in a gray suit slowly closed his laptop. Until that moment, he had remained still and assuming, barely noticeable. His seat was close enough to observe everything, but far enough not to be involved. At least, not yet. His name was Lawrence Hale. To most passengers, he was just another businessman heading to Zurich. But to Halcyon Air's inner circle, Lawrence had another title: executive director of a corporate strategy. And more importantly, the man who had quietly protected certain crew members through performance immunity clauses built into their contracts. Karen Walker was one of them. Lawrence leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had underestimated Celeste Monroe, and he had certainly underestimated Julian. He thought he understood power, how it maneuvered, when it struck. But this wasn't just a private altercation. It was public theater. And Julian had thrown open the curtains. Across the aisle, a younger man leaned toward him. Matthew Grant, assistant strategist from Lawrence's team, had been watching too. "Should we notify the board?" Matthew whispered. Lawrence didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on Julian and Celeste at the front of the cabin. "No," he said finally. "Not yet. But the headlines. There won't be headlines if I get ahead of this." Matthew hesitated. "Do you think Karen will talk?" Lawrence gave him a tight smile. "She won't. She knows what she's tied to. If she talks, she burns with it." Matthew didn't ask what it was. He already knew. Halcyon's public image was pristine: clean branding, diverse ad campaigns, community scholarships. But beneath the polish, there were fractures, bias complaints buried, crew behavior protected under the guise of veteran authority. A pattern not just with Karen, but others. And Lawrence had been the architect of those systems, not out of malice, but out of what he called organizational loyalty. If a senior crew member brought in record profits, customer satisfaction scores, and handled the cabin, then he'd do what he had to do to keep them flying. Tonight, that structure had cracked, and Julian had fired the first missile. Meanwhile, back near seat 1A, Celeste's fingers gently tapped the armrest, not anxiously, rhythmically. She was thinking. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "No, we've only just begun." She nodded slowly. "There's a man sitting in seat 6D. Gray suit, sharp shoes. He hasn't said a word, but he's been watching everything." Julian turned slightly, following her subtle nod. His eyes found Lawrence immediately, and Lawrence, to his credit, didn't look away. Their eyes locked. Julian gave him a nod, not a greeting, a recognition. Lawrence tilted his head just enough to register the signal. A Cold War had started. "I want you to rest," Julian said to Celeste. "We land in 4 hours. The real part comes after. You're going to face them, aren't you?" "The board will demand it," he replied. "I'll give them more than they bargained for." Her hand found his. "I'm not going to disappear. Julian, not after tonight." "I know." Just then, Alina approached quietly. "There's a request." She said, "Passenger in 6D would like to speak with you privately. Says it's urgent." Julian didn't blink. "Tell Mr. Hale. I'll see him in the rear galley. 10 minutes. Alina hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, and Alina, thank you for standing tall tonight." She flushed, nodded, and walked away. When she was gone, Celeste glanced up. "Be careful. He won't fight clean." "He never has," Julian replied. "But I'm not the same man he tried to cut deals with 3 years ago." 10 minutes later, Julian stepped into the rear galley. The lights were dimmer here, the hum of the engines louder. The quiet of authority didn't reach this far. Lawrence was already waiting. He stood with the composure of a man still pretending he controlled the boardroom. "Julian," he said smoothly. "Lawrence." They didn't shake hands. "You handled that impressively," Lawrence said. "The crew's been whispering about it. Your wife, she was composed, resilient. Don't compliment her. You let that behavior go on for years." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "Careful. You're making assumptions." Julian took a slow breath. "You inserted clauses that made Karen Walker untouchable. You intervened in complaints. You used your position to silence." "I streamlined," Lawrence replied. "I protected the brand. That's what my job is. Not anymore." Lawrence's smile thinned. "You think the board will side with you? You think they want this scandal played out in the press? It's your wife's word against a senior crew member. Sure, you've got some support, but trust me, they'll circle the wagons. Because if Karen goes down, others will too." Julian stepped closer. "I'm counting on it." For the first time, Lawrence's mask flickered. Julian continued, voice calm, surgical. "You think I care about preserving your old system? You think I'll trade justice for clean metrics? I built this airline from the ground up, not for people like Karen, but for people like Celeste, like Alina, like every passenger who thought they were invisible. You're making this personal. It is personal." Lawrence exhaled slowly. "This will become political, messy. The unions will get involved." "Good." Julian said, "Let them come." Lawrence narrowed his eyes. "You're not just trying to fix this flight. You want to purge?" "No," Julian said, stepping back. "I want a reckoning." Lawrence stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Well," he said, straightening his tie, "then I suppose we'll see whose vision wins." Julian didn't answer. Lawrence turned and walked away, his footsteps muffled by the carpet. Julian remained still. Behind him, one of the junior stewards emerged quietly from the curtain. "I overheard," the young man said. "I wasn't trying to, but I was prepping the coffee cart." "It's all right," Julian said. "What's your name, Darius?" "Darius Min." Julian offered a faint smile. "Darius, in the next few weeks, people are going to start asking questions about who knew what, who said what. You'll have choices to make." Darius nodded nervously. "I just want to do the right thing," he said. Julian's eyes softened. "Then you already know what to do." As he walked back up the aisle, Julian caught a glimpse of Karen seated alone in the crew's jump seat. Her eyes were down, her hands still, for now, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way. She had allies, ghosts of a broken system. And this wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time in years, Julian felt ready, not to fight, to rebuild. The wheels touched down with a soft bump, followed by the hum of deceleration and a light shudder that ran through the cabin floor. Celeste gripped the armrest reflexively, more out of habit than fear. She'd always hated landings, the way the sky gave way to gravity again. But this time, it wasn't the descent that unsettled her. It was the world waiting on the other side. Julian watched her from the seat beside her. His hand rested lightly on her, silent, steady. They didn't speak during the taxi. Words felt too small for the weight hanging between them. Outside the window, Zurich's tarmac stretched wide and gray, glistening from recent rain. Airport lights shimmered on the puddles like city reflections on glass. "Are we being met by security?" Celeste asked finally, her voice low. Julian nodded once. "2 agents, not uniformed, just enough to handle potential press or disruptions." She gave a faint, tired smile. always prepared. Julian didn't smile back. Not yet. When the plane reached its gate, the captain's voice came overhead, clear but slightly tense. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Zurich International. On behalf of Halcyon Air, we thank you for flying with us this evening. We ask that all passengers remain seated as the crew completes deplaning protocols. The message was standard, but the pause at the end wasn't. Julian unbuckled. So did Celeste. Neither moved right away. They waited. Finally, the forward cabin door hissed open. 2 plainclothes agents stepped aboard, tall, composed, quietly efficient. One of them made brief eye contact with Julian. Nodded. Time to move. Helena appeared from the galley and approached quickly. Her eyes met Celeste's. I wanted to say thank you, she said softly. Not just for what you did, but for holding your head up, for showing us how to stand. Celeste blinked. The words hit deeper than expected. I was just trying not to fall apart. Helena gave a small smile. Exactly. Julian shook Helena's hand. You'll hear from my team by end of day. Be ready. She nodded, then stepped aside. As they walked toward the exit, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Some passengers looked down at their phones, pretending not to stare. Others watched openly, unsure if they were witnessing history or scandal. Karen Walker stood silently near the jump seat, her arms folded. She no longer looked confident, just guarded. Her eyes met Celeste's for a fleeting second. Celeste didn't flinch. She simply held the gaze calm, unwavering. Then she walked past. Julian followed, nodding once at Captain Douglas as they exited. Outside, a sleek black sedan waited. The air was crisp, laced with the scent of rain and jet fuel. The plainclothes agents flanked them until the car door closed with a quiet finality. Inside, Celeste exhaled slowly. The silence between them now felt necessary. Not empty, sacred. Across the globe, things were far less quiet. By the time their wheels had touched down, someone on board had leaked the incident. A blurry photo Celeste-soaked expression, stunned, had hit social media. Then came a second post, a description of Julian Monroe confronting a senior flight attendant midair. The hashtags began trending within the hour. Halcyon Scandal, Marin Flight 104. Not just a can of Coke. Boge, her name is Celeste. Within 2 hours, a video snippet appeared filmed quietly from seat 3F. It showed Karen Walker's face moments after the incident, her dismissive glance, and the moment Helena stepped in. By morning, 3 major outlets were demanding comment. Julian sat at a conference table in Halcyon's Zurich Regional H. Kwan all-glass room, overlooking a gray, still tarmac. His phone buzzed nonstop. His executive assistant, Kai, stood nearby, relaying updates like a news anchor during a storm. Media coordination is asking for a holding statement. Legal recommends we keep it internal. Karen's union has already filed a preliminary grievance. Julian didn't respond. Kai continued, and the board has called an emergency session. 75 minutes from now, remote. They want answers. Julian stood slowly. Then they'll get them. He walked to the head of the table and placed both hands flat on the cool glass surface. I'm going to tell them the truth. Kai blinked. Are you sure they may try to? They can try anything they want, Julian interrupted. But I won't sit quietly while they protect a structure that hurt the woman I love and hundreds more like her. Kai lowered his voice. This could cost you your seat. Then let them take it. Julian turned toward the window. They'll have to fight me in the daylight this time. Meanwhile, in a small corner cafe just outside the Zurich terminal, Karen Walker sat hunched over her phone. She scrolled through the headlines with a sick expression faced tight, fingers trembling slightly. Beside her sat Gerald Finch, the former in-flight HR director. "I told you," she hissed. "They're using me as a scapegoat." Gerald sipped his espresso like it was nothing. They always need someone to burn. Karen glared. "You said I had immunity." "You did," Gerald said. "But Julian's playing a different game now. He's not protecting anyone, not even himself." Karen slammed her phone down. "They're not going to end me over a spilled drink." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "They might, especially if that drink becomes a metaphor." She stared at him, and for the first time, real fear entered her eyes. "What should I do?" Gerald leaned in. "Fight back. Call the union. Call the media. Say it was an accident. Say it's retaliation. Say anything. Just don't stay silent." Karen swallowed. Then she opened her email. Inside the boardroom call, 12 faces appeared on the screen. Some familiar, some political, all carefully neutral. Julian sat centered, unmoving. "Julian," one of the directors began, "we understand there was an incident. We'd like to hear your version before determining the next steps." Julian inhaled, slowly, purposefully. Then he spoke. "My wife, Celeste Monroe, was assaulted with a full can of Coca-Cola in the middle of her work, on our aircraft, in first class, by a senior crew member with a known history of discriminatory conduct." A murmur rippled through the call. Julian didn't stop. Not only was it deliberate, but the internal complaints filed over the past year were hidden, buried. "I've recovered 8 cases, possibly more. Names redacted, outcomes falsified." A different board member narrowed his eyes. "How do you know this?" "Because I read them. Personally. Last night. And I've already spoken to 2 witnesses." Another director cleared her throat. "And your response, Julian," met her gaze. "I've removed Karen Walker from active duty, indefinitely, pending a full investigation, and I'm initiating an internal audit of every crew member with 3 or more informal passenger complaints." A silence fell. "Julian," one director said carefully, "this will set a precedent. I hope so." Another director leaned forward. "This could cost us millions in union arbitration." Julian nodded. "And how much has silence cost us already?" No one answered. He continued. "I didn't build Halcyon Air to become another company that protects its image over its people. If you want a CEO who will bury the truth, you're welcome to vote me out." He paused. "But if you want one who's ready to rebuild trust, I suggest we start now, because the world is watching." And this time, they're not just watching, but they're watching all of you. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, one of the directors, an older woman with silver hair, unmuted. "I stand with you, Julian." Then another, and another. And suddenly, it wasn't just a board meeting. It was the beginning of a shift. Back at the hotel suite, Celeste stared at her inbox. Messages poured in hundreds. Some supportive, some hateful, some just lost. One message stood out. "My daughter was refused water on a flight last year. She was 12. Thank you for not being silent." Celeste put the phone down, and finally let herself cry. Not from pain, from release. It started with a whisper. An anonymous email sent from a personal account at 2:14 a.m. to Halcyon Air's Internal Ethics Division. Subject line: "I was there on Flight 104. The message was short, barely 6 lines, but every word pulsed with weight. "I've been silent for too long. I witnessed what happened to Mrs. Monroe. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was targeted. I've watched this kind of behavior happen before. I'm ready to speak in record if needed. My name is Alina Reyes. I will no longer stand by. That message triggered a chain reaction. By noon, 3 more crew members had contacted Internal Affairs. By sunset, the number had grown to 11, most of them current Halcyon employees. Others former staff who had left after internal conflicts they were told to move past for the sake of company loyalty. Julian sat in the Zurich regional office, reading the reports one by one. His eyes were tired but focused, scanning for patterns, correlations, missed signals. "They're coming forward," Kai said quietly, handing him another printed statement. "One of them even flew with Karen last year and filed a complaint that mysteriously vanished." Julian looked up. How many of these were handled by Gerald Finch? Kai didn't hesitate. All of them. Julian leaned back, exhaling slowly. The room was dim except for the soft white glow of the recessed lights above the long table. "They were never ignored," he murmured, "just erased." Outside, light snow began to fall against the Zurich skyline. Meanwhile, in a sleek PR office in downtown Chicago, Karen Walker sat opposite a crisis management consultant named Elliot Drayton, an expert in reputation salvage and media diversion. He was young, hungry, and absolutely ruthless. "So let's be honest," Elliot began, tapping a pen against a notepad. "You're not winning the sympathy game. The optics are terrible woman of color soaked in coke. Millionaire CEO husband stepping in like it's a courtroom drama. You need to shift the story." Karen crossed her arms. "I didn't assault anyone. It was a mistake. A mistake caught on 3 different cell phones," Elliot replied flatly. "So we go with emotional fatigue, long shifts, mental health strain. You've served the airline for 22 years. Let's position you as a scapegoat of internal politics." Karen hesitated. "And what about the others? What others?" She frowned. "Crew who might speak up." Elliot gave a tight, rehearsed smile. "Then we questioned their motives. Maybe it's jealousy. Maybe it's timing. Either way, we paint you as someone loyal. Stressed, but loyal." Karen hated the way he said it. Like it wasn't truth. Just spin. But deep down, she knew this was survival now, not defense. Back in Zurich, Celeste stood in front of a mirror, smoothing out a navy blue blouse. No sequins, no silk, no color to invite commentary. Just clean lines and quiet strength. She had agreed to do 1 interview. 1. It wasn't for drama, not for fame. It was for her, for closure, and for every passenger who had once been dismissed with a sigh, a rolled eye, or worse, silence. The studio was small, tucked into a side wing of a local news network. The journalist, Melina Krauss, was young but precise, known for her unshakable calm and sharp instinct for stories that mattered. As the cameras rolled, Melina asked her opening question, "Mrs. Monroe, why did you decide to speak publicly?" Now Celeste took a breath. Not for the camera, for her voice, because there's power in saying I didn't deserve that. The studio fell silent. She continued, "For too long, people like me, black women, women of color, we've been told to let it go. Don't cause trouble. Don't escalate. But silence doesn't protect you. It just protects the person who wronged you." Melina nodded. "What do you want people to take from this moment?" Celeste met her gaze. "That dignity isn't a privilege reserved for the quiet. And standing up for yourself doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you human." The clip would go viral within hours, across Halcyon's crew lounges. The interview was replayed again and again. Some watched in silence. Others applauded. A few wept quietly in corners. Alina Reyes received more than 200 messages in one night, some anonymous, some tearfully honest. Thank you for standing up. I always thought I was crazy for feeling humiliated on Flight 287. I watched Karen yell at a teenage girl over a blanket. I never forgot the way that girl looked after. I thought I was the only one. In the break room of a Halcyon training center in Atlanta, a young crew member named Isaac Tatum stood up in front of his cohort. I want to say something, he began, voice shaking slightly. I've been here 2 years. I thought being gay and mixed race would be harder for the passengers. Turns out, the hardest part was surviving Karen's sarcasm every time I opened my mouth. The room was silent. Then one by one, heads began to nod, and for the first time, someone in training recorded the conversation, not for clout, not for evidence, but for truth. On the executive side, the Halcyon board convened again, this time virtually and without pleasantries. A special session was requested by Director Simone Hargrove, the first black woman ever appointed to the board. I move that we open a formal review into how internal complaints have been handled over the past 5 years, she said bluntly, and that we immediately suspend all non-essential contract renewals until the audit is complete. Some board members looked tense, others quietly relieved. We can't pretend anymore, she added. We either fix it or we rot under it. Julian didn't need to speak. For once, the truth was doing the work, and yet not everyone embraced the shift. Inside Karen's apartment that evening, she stared at her own face on a trending news segment. The caption read, "Wreckage in the Sky. A legacy crew member under fire." Elliot had warned her it would sting, but nothing could prepare her for the way people were talking about her, not as a professional, but as a symbol of something broken. She slammed the remote down and began typing, furious, unfiltered. I've been with Halcyon longer than Julian Monroe has even been in aviation. You all think you know what happened. You don't. You weren't there. He wants to play hero fine. But don't forget who trained half the crew on those international routes. Me. She hit post before she could stop herself. The comment section erupted instantly. Half support, half fury. But the damage was done, and her anger was now public record. Late that night, Julian walked into the hotel room to find Celeste asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked around her shoulders. Her phone buzzed quietly next to her, screen filled with messages of love, anger, and thanks. He didn't wake her. He simply sat beside her, watching her breathe. And for the first time since the flight, he felt something shift inside him. Not vengeance, not strategy, but hope. That maybe this was the beginning of a better airline, a better truth, and a better way to fly. It had been 48 hours since the interview aired. 48 hours since Celeste Monroe became something she never intended, a symbol. The messages didn't stop, nor did the headlines. She had gone from soaked passenger to national voice for dignity in air travel, from one moment, one flight, one can of soda, but something in her chest felt heavy. Celeste sat in the quiet corner of the hotel room, legs curled beneath her, a soft jazz playlist humming low from her laptop. She hadn't been able to sleep. Not really. Julian walked in, still in his crisp shirt and vest, though the top buttons were undone and the sleeves slightly wrinkled. He looked like a man holding the weight of 10 boardrooms on his back. He saw her and paused. You okay? Celeste looked up, hesitated. I don't know. He stepped closer. She turned her phone toward him. A message thread. This one from a former flight attendant named Lydia Crane. I saw your interview. You said everything I never could. But now my sister's getting death threats for defending you online. I'm scared for her, and proud, and scared again. Is this what justice feels like? Julian sat beside her. It's not justice yet, he said quietly. It's the fight before it. He leaned into his shoulder. I didn't want to become a movement. Julian, I just wanted to sit down. He kissed the top of her head. I know. Outside the window. Zurich glowed softly beneath the night sky. Planes came and went in the distance, on time, unaware. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Karen Walker was ramping up. With Elliot Drayton steering her ship, she scheduled a full press interview with a major media network known for sensational spins. The anchor Rhonda Bell was famous for turning conflict into television gold. Her promos even featured fire graphics. Karen arrived early, hair done, blazer sharp, eyes hollow. As the cameras began rolling, Rhonda smiled like a knife. So, Karen. The nation knows your name, but do they know your truth? Karen leaned forward. I've flown over 8,000 hours for Halcyon Air. I've served more passengers than I can count. I've helped elderly folks who couldn't stand. I've comforted babies on red eyes. I've done my job with pride. And now I'm being destroyed over a single moment. Rhonda raised a brow. And that moment, you threw a drink. Karen nodded stiffly. I made a mistake, but not out of hate, out of stress. That flight was delayed. We had system outages. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 2 days. And I was being yelled at by a passenger for not getting her a second glass of champagne fast enough. Celeste's name was never spoken, but everyone watching knew exactly who that passenger was. Karen continued, and now I'm the villain. While my employer, who also happens to be the husband of that passenger, is burning my career at the stake to protect his reputation, boom. That line alone would dominate the news cycle for days. The interviewer leaned in, smelling blood. Do you think you're being punished unfairly? Karen met the camera directly. I think I'm being sacrificed. She let the silence do its work. The union came next. A letter from the International Cabin Crew Association arrived at Halcyon Air's Zurich office. It was written with clipped, controlled fury. If disciplinary action against Ms. Walker proceeds without a full and fair arbitration process, as outlined in Article 4 of the crew agreement, Halcyon Air will face a formal strike notice within 72 hours. Julian read the letter twice, then again. Kai stood nearby. We expected this. Not this fast, Julian muttered. They're cornering us. He paced, the letter still in hand. The audit's barely begun. I've got whistleblowers, victims, and now this. Kai frowned. Do we stall? Julian shook his head. No, we escalate. He reached for the phone. At the same time, Celeste was scrolling through the trending hashtags. She knew she shouldn't, but it was like a wound she couldn't help touching. Forza Team Karen, Orbs cancel culture witch hunt, Orb George, not a feminist, icon, Orb Bo, she weaponized race. And beneath it all, real people, both defenders and attackers, slinging words like bricks. She felt her stomach tighten. How had a flight gone so far off the runway? There was a knock on the door. Alina Reyes. Celeste blinked in surprise. Can I come in? Alina asked gently. I'm flying out again soon. Just wanted to talk before I did. Celeste stepped back, nodding. Alina looked thinner than before, maybe just more tired, but her eyes still unwavering. I watched Karen's interview, she said. It rattled a few people. Crew chat groups are going wild. Celeste gave a dry laugh. I'm sure. She's playing the martyr card, Alina continued. But you know what something strange is happening too? Celeste looked at her. People are standing up quietly, not all public like me, but they're asking questions, real ones, to management, to each other, to themselves. Celeste stared at the floor. I don't want them getting hurt. They already were, Alina replied. Now at least they have language for it. The two women sat in quiet for a while, a rare peace between turbulence. Then Alina stood. Fly safe, Celeste said softly. You too, Alina replied. In whatever sky you're in next, by midnight. Julian was on a secure video call with Simone Hargrove and 3 key labor lawyers. The room was tense. I'm not afraid of the strike, Julian said, but I won't cave to union pressure without presenting the full pattern. Simone nodded. Then we need to do it fast. Evidence, timeline, witnesses. Julian spoke without blinking. Then I'm going to Zurich HQ myself. I'll speak to every crew member who filed a past report. No lawyers, no tape recorders, just truth. One lawyer, a man in his late 50s named Leo Durham, shook his head. You're the CEO. You don't conduct interviews. Julian met his eyes. I'm not conducting interviews. I'm listening. And just like that, the tone shifted from power play to purpose. Back in her hotel room, Celeste stared at herself in the mirror. The woman in the reflection looked different, not famous, not afraid, just more awake. And somewhere deep inside, she began to whisper the words she hadn't said since the flight. I forgive her. The words tasted foreign, not because she didn't believe them, but because she didn't know if forgiveness could exist without accountability. Still, she whispered again, I forgive her, but I won't protect her. It wasn't peace, but it was a place to begin. The Zurich headquarters of Halcyon Air had never felt so heavy. It was early morning. A gray fog clung to the windows of the executive suite, muting the skyline behind them. Inside the boardroom usually used for quarterly earnings reviews and strategic forecasts, Julian had set up 2 chairs. Just 2. One for him, one for whoever had something to say. No titles, no note-takers, no cameras. Just conversation. The first to enter was a woman in her 40s, crisp uniform pressed, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion clinging to her movements. Captain Lena Harwood. She introduced herself. Julian stood to shake her hand, then gestured to the seat. Thank you for coming. She sat carefully. The silence that followed was not awkward, but loaded. Julian didn't interrupt it. Finally, she spoke. I flew with Karen 4 times in the last 2 years. 2 of those flights. Things happened. Julian nodded, encouraging her gently. She reprimanded a South Asian father for calming his daughter in his own language, said it made passengers uncomfortable. Julian's jaw tightened. Was there a complaint? I submitted one, she said. It disappeared from the portal a week later. Lena swallowed hard. I've been flying for 15 years. I've seen difficult passengers. I've seen stress. But this wasn't stress. It was a pattern. She targeted those who looked different, spoke differently, especially if they were women. Julian didn't blink. He just listened. And the worst part, Lena whispered, most of us stayed quiet because we were told she was protected. A long pause passed between them. Not anymore, Julian finally said. Throughout the day, more came. A gay male attendant who recounted being repeatedly told to act straighter on international flights. A biracial crew member who had been moved off routes after complaints that were never shown to him in writing. Even a senior engineer, whose sister aunts a junior flight attendant had quit after Karen mocked her for wearing her natural curls, calling them unprofessional. Each story wasn't a bombshell, but together they formed a storm. By early evening, Julian had spoken with 9 employees, each echoing the same sentiment. It wasn't just about one Coke can. It was about a culture that had allowed it to happen and protected the people who kept it alive. Back in Chicago, Karen Walker was pacing her apartment, the television on mute. The news anchor's lips moved silently beneath a headline banner that read, "New allegations emerge against Halcyon Air veteran crew leader." Her phone buzzed. It was Elliot. She let it go to voicemail. Another buzz. This time a message. "They're digging. Everything. Every complaint you ever touched. Every reassignment. They're compiling a file." Karen sank onto the edge of the couch. She had thought the interview would turn the tide. It had just not in the way she hoped. She picked up her phone and opened an old album. Photos of her early days with Halcyon, training days, her first trip to Milan, laughing with the crew in a layover lounge in Seoul. What happened? When did pride turn into power? When did power become cruelty? She didn't have the answer, but now it didn't matter, because someone else was holding the narrative, and it wasn't her. Celeste sat in a cafe below the hotel, warm cup of tea between her hands. She wore a simple wool sweater, no makeup, headphones in, but no music playing. Across from her was a journalist from a human rights blog. They weren't doing a recorded interview, just a conversation. "You never press charges," the journalist said gently. Why Celeste stirred her tea slowly. "I wasn't trying to destroy someone. I just wanted someone to acknowledge what happened, and then make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. Do you think that's happening now?" Celeste hesitated. "Yes," she said softly, "but it's painful to watch, even when it's the right thing." The journalist closed her notebook. "You know, most stories like this don't go this far." Celeste looked up. "Why do you think this one did?" "Because you didn't scream. You spoke, and people heard you." At Halcyon's Zurich offices, Julian sat in his suite, reviewing the testimonies. Kai walked in, a file folder in hand. "Final crew report," he said. Julian opened it. Inside was a printed list. Names, routes, incident summaries, a hidden archive of quiet damage. But it was the last page that stopped him. A formal internal complaint, filed under seal, from a name he didn't recognize, Nia Grayson, filed 2 years ago, accusing Karen Walker of racial bias during a long-haul flight to Rio, rejected by Gerald Finch for insufficient evidence. Julian flipped the page. Attached was a resignation letter from Nia dated a week later. "I remember this," Kai murmured. "She was in training class behind mine. She just vanished." Julian stood abruptly. "Get me her contact. I want to hear her story." Kai hesitated. "There's one more thing." He handed Julian a small envelope. It had been slid under the door anonymously. Inside was a single sentence, typed on an old printer. "The culture of silence has ended. Speak carefully." Julian stared at the paper. Someone wasn't happy, and they were watching. That night, Celeste sat by the window again, this time not out of restlessness, but reflection. She thought of every person who had messaged her, the women who said thank you, the men who confessed shame for staying silent in their own moments, even the few who wrote hatefully, but included just enough self-doubt to hint they were fighting their own conditioning. Julian returned just after 11. His coat was wet with sleet, his eyes tired, but clear. "How'd it go?" she asked. He took off his jacket. They told the truth. She nodded, and now Julian looked at her. "Now we write it down." The next morning, Halcyon Air issued a press release. It wasn't a defense. It wasn't a marketing statement. It was an acknowledgement. Halcyon Air has initiated a full-scale review of all personnel conduct complaints received within the past 5 years, with a commitment to transparency and accountability. We have failed to act on patterns that should have never been ignored. That ends now. It didn't name names, but everyone already knew who was at the center of the storm. Karen read it from her kitchen. She sat in silence. Then slowly, almost instinctively, she opened her laptop and began writing something no PR firm had suggested. A letter, not of defense, not of strategy, but of apology. It began with "To Celeste Monroe." Karen's hands hovered over the keyboard, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. Her apartment was quiet, too quiet. She had written hundreds of in-flight reports over the years, filled out evaluations, safety logs, and incident statements, but nothing felt as daunting as this. The letter. It wasn't an admission of guilt in the legal sense. It wasn't crafted by PR consultants. It was simply human. To Celeste Monroe. I don't know where to begin. Perhaps with the truth that I've avoided for years. I hurt people. I made people feel small, unwelcome, ashamed of who they were. Some days I told myself it was policy. Other days I blamed exhaustion. But at the center of it all was me and my choices. I threw a drink on you, and while the world saw a single moment, what haunts me now is that for you it wasn't the first. You deserved more than an apology. You deserved to be treated like a person. I am not writing this to clear my name. I am writing this to say I see what I didn't want to see. And I'm sorry. Karen Walker. She stared at it, reread it, and finally hit print. 2 weeks later, on a chilly Monday morning, Julian Monroe stood in front of every senior executive at Halcyon Air. The lights were dimmed, the air still. Behind him, a single slide glowed on the presentation screen. The reckoning was not the fall. It was the landing. He took a breath. This is not a rebranding. He began. This is not damage control. This is acknowledgement of what we've permitted, of who we've silenced, of the people we've failed. He clicked the remote. Slides appeared. A timeline of missed complaints. A list of wrongful transfers. Internal memos that ignored systemic patterns. And then, quotes. From crew, anonymous, but raw. I learned to swallow shame before I served champagne. Flying was freedom, until I realized my identity was baggage. We feared the gate more than the turbulence. Julian let the silence stretch. I've read every story, he said, his voice steady. And starting today, every crew member will too. This will be a required part of onboarding, not just our triumphs, but our truth. He looked around the room, and we will rebuild. Not around policy, but people. Karen had not flown since that day. She had received the company's termination letter. Clean, procedural, no cruelty, no headlines, just closure. She had also received one other thing, an envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Celeste's. I read your letter. It was painful, but it mattered. We don't need to meet, but I want you to know my silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. And now, it's strength. I hope you find yours. Celeste Karen sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. Then she stood, walked to her bedroom, and pulled from the closet a dusty notebook pages of old in-flight poetry she used to write during red-eye layovers. She began to read them again. One line stood out, underlined in faint blue ink. The sky is only free for those who remember how to land. Celeste stood at the gate of Flight 409 to New York. She wasn't flying for protest or redemption. She was simply traveling. A weekend with her sister. Time to breathe. The gate agent smiled warmly. "Ms. Monroe, you've been upgraded." Celeste blinked. "I didn't request." The woman leaned in, voice low. "Courtesy of Mr. Monroe." Celeste laughed softly. She walked onto the plane, noticing something different in the crew's body language. A lightness, not performative, not nervous, just human. The new lead attendant, young black, with braids pulled into a neat bun, welcomed her personally. "Thanks for flying with us today. Miss Monroe, we're honored to have you." Celeste didn't need champagne. She just needed to exhale. Meanwhile, Julian sat in his office with Simone Hargrove. The board had ratified sweeping reforms, new diversity standards, third-party complaint portals, and paid mental health support for all crew members. But one thing remained. "I want to name the new integrity program," Julian said, holding a coffee cup that read "Compassion is Policy." Simone raised an eyebrow. "You already have something in mind." He nodded. "Monroe Protocol." She smiled. "Then let's sign it in." In a small high school classroom in Atlanta, a young girl named Zara clicked on a video for her history project. It was Celeste's interview. Zara was doing a report on everyday acts that changed public systems. She watched as Celeste described the moment, the splash of cold soda, the hush of passengers, the slow stand of her husband. But what stuck with Zara wasn't the anger. It was the calm. The way Celeste never raised her voice. The way she made everyone feel seen without needing to destroy. Zara turned to her classmate. "I want to be like her," she said. Her friend raised a brow. "A lawyer." Zara shook her head. "Someone who speaks, and people finally listen." That night, Julian and Celeste stood by their balcony window in New York. The city blinked beneath them. "Think it'll last?" Celeste asked, sipping wine. Julian wrapped an arm around her. "No, not unless we keep going." She leaned into him. "I never wanted to lead a movement." "You didn't," he said. "You lit a match in the dark. Others followed the flame." She smiled, then whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes justice wears quiet shoes." And beneath them, far below the clouds, people kept walking, some still blind, but many now seeing. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It walks in, quietly, wearing designer heels, holding hands with truth, and leaving behind a ripple that becomes a wave. Celeste Monroe didn't fight with noise. She faced cruelty with composure. And her silence, once mistaken for weakness, became the loudest sound in the room. This wasn't just about a spilled drink. It was about every unfiled complaint, every smirk, every voice told to stay quiet, for the company's image. But because one woman stood up and one man stood beside her, an entire industry was forced to take a hard look in the mirror. In a world still divided by bias, may we remember power used with compassion changes more than punishment ever could. If this story moved you, if it stirred something you couldn't quite name, or reminded you of something you never forgot, then don't let it end here. Hit like, share this story, and subscribe to the channel. Your voice, your presence, it matters more than you know. And remember, justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears a seatbelt. We'll see you in the next story